Hey, this is Joel Duff. Welcome back to my channel. Maybe you've heard the headlines. New Montana bill would prevent schools from teaching scientific theories. Draft bill bans everything but scientific fact in Montana schools. Montana bill would ban teaching of scientific theories in all schools, only allowing scientific facts to exist. These sound like really dramatic headlines. This comes out of a recent bill that was introduced to the Montana state legislature by a brand new state senator. And it's created a little mini firestorm of controversy, in the scientific community who are discussing this. And I want to ask the question, are those headlines overly dramatic, as many headlines often tend to be, or is there really something behind this? Is this something that scientists, and really I won't say scientists, I'll say like everybody should be concerned about? Actually, I think the answer is yes. I think that this is not over dramatized. But however, I think that what would help is if we went to the actual bill and read the legislation or the proposed legislation. And that's what we're going to do here. This bill that was recently introduced is only 1 page long, maybe a page and a half, but 1 page constitutes the part that we're interested in. And I'm going to be able to use, I think this is going to be helpful to look at because it'll help sort out what is fact from fiction in the headlines and the descriptions that are out there in the popular press. And will also allow us to maybe take a look at some myths, all right? Some scientific misconceptions, because there's a number of misconceptions that are introduced in the bill, which is kind of ironic because the bill is to try to avoid misconceptions and misunderstanding because it's centered around only teaching facts, right? We're only going to have truth in schools. And in the very introduction of the bill itself includes a misconception about science that the author of this bill must have learned somewhere himself, possibly in school. And so he's going to promote a misconception, thinking that it's truth because of what he believes is the truth, the difference between a scientific fact and a scientific theory. So let's discuss scientific facts, scientific theories as we read this bill introduced to the Montana State Legislature. Okay, here it is. This is the bill introduced to the 68th Legislature in 2020, Senate Bill number 235. So we have Senate Bill number 235 introduced by what I presume, Senator Emmerich, the primary author, but also 2 other, what I presume are members of the Montana State Legislature, but I didn't look them up. So here we go. A bill for an act entitled An Act Establishing Requirements for Science Instruction in Public Schools, Defining Scientific Fact. All right, so here in the title, we're going to define scientific fact in this bill, and providing an immediate effective date. All right, so that's the title of the bill. All right, let's get to the resolution. Whereas the purpose of K-12 education is to educate children in the facts of our world to better prepare them for their future and future education in their chosen field of study. We're off to a good start. And to that end, children must know the difference between scientific fact and scientific theory. I'm okay with that statement. I think it is important for our students to understand the difference between what a scientific fact and a scientific theory are. And whereas a scientific fact, so here we're going to learn the definition of a scientific fact, is observable and repeatable. And if it does not meet these criteria, it is a theory that is defined as speculation and is for higher education to explore, debate, and test, and to ultimately reach a scientific conclusion of fact or fiction. Okay, let's stop here for a moment before we get to the specific requirements for schools and how they're going to implement this new proposal or implement this new bill. I sure hope you see some of the problems here in the second part. All right, so scientific fact is observable and repeatable. And if it does not meet these criteria, it's a theory. And now they're defining a theory as speculation. But then what is going to happen to that speculation? Well, higher education can explore, debate, and lead and test, apparently, that speculation, and ultimately reach a scientific conclusion of fact or fiction. So apparently theories can become facts after they've been studied by higher education, right? After higher people in higher education, I guess universities and colleges, People like myself, professors who are doing research, if we explore, debate, and test some of these speculative theories, then we can determine whether they're fact or fiction. So at some point I say, well, yeah, if that theory is a fact. Well, then when it becomes a fact, is it no longer a theory, I guess? And then at that point, it can be taught to children in K through 12 schools because they can be taught scientific facts, but not scientific theories. This is super confusing right off the get-go. It also presents and part of the reason it's confusing because this person's confused about the definition of a theory. Hey, I've got an idea. Let's ask ChatGPT what it thinks is the difference between a scientific fact and a scientific theory. So I said exactly that. I said, what is the difference between a scientific fact and a scientific theory? First response, a scientific fact is an observation or measurement that has been repeatedly confirmed and is accepted as true. A scientific fact is considered to be reliable and unchanging and forms the basis of scientific knowledge. All right, so repeatedly observed, confirmed, accepted as true. A scientific fact is considered reliable and unchangeable. It forms the basis of scientific knowledge. All right, so that's scientific fact. A scientific theory, on the other hand, is a comprehensive explanation of the phenomena that has been repeatedly confirmed through testing and observation. A scientific theory is not simply a guess or a hypothesis, but rather is a well-substantiated and widely accepted explanation of the natural world. Theories are based on a larger body of evidence, and they are considered to be the most accurate and reliable explanations of the phenomena they describe. All right, so theories. Another way of putting it, you'll often hear is theories explain facts, or theories offer explanations for what have been observed. All right, the observations that are the fixed observations, the facts of this world, can be kind of dry and meaningless unless you add some context to like an explanation for how those facts fit together. And so that's what we say, that's what a theory does, is it holds together a body of facts into a larger idea. But that larger idea isn't necessarily a fact in itself. ChatGPT doesn't end there. It adds one other important clause. It's important to note that a scientific theory is not the same as the casual use for the word theory, which often refers to a hunch or an idea that has not been proven. In science, a theory is a well-established and well-supported explanation for a wide range of phenomena. All right, I think this is fairly astute of ChatGPT to recognize that the word theory can be used in multiple ways. And here I've asked for the definition of what is a scientific theory. And it's providing me like recognizing that there's a misconception out there about what a theory is, because we throw around the theory a lot. Like, I have this theory, right? Oh, I got this theory, blah, 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 blah. And it sounds a lot like speculation. That's what this particular senator has done, is he's conflated the common parlance use of the word theory with what a scientific theory is. And so he's calling these theories just speculation. These are just my speculation on something, anyone else's speculation. How do we know what's right? We can't know. Those aren't facts, right? We can't teach these to kids because they might be wrong. We should only be teaching facts to children. So, again, it's like, let me give some examples, right? Now, they've already had a meeting in which they've brought in, witnesses to talk about what the potential problems of enacting this bill might be. And as you might imagine, they brought in a bunch of school kids and teachers to talk about what they wouldn't be learning if they, used a very restrictive, if they very literally took what this bill says to heart. So if this bill were enacted, what would it look like, right? How would this guide the education of K through 12 students in their science education? So then they outline a series of 6 different things that they think will be required, that they're asking to be required of schools. Let's take a look at those before we get into some examples of theories versus facts and how this legislation would impact that. So requirements for science instruction in schools. Science instruction may not include subject matter that is not scientific fact. Okay, so you can only include facts. I mean, this stuff sounds kind of like, yeah, okay, I only want my kids taught facts, right? I don't want them to be taught speculation. Sounds kind of intuitive. The problem is that if you're only going to teach facts, I got to tell you, science is going to be pretty boring. It's going to be what a lot of people kind of perceive science to be, which is memorizing a whole bunch of terms. All right, here's the facts. All right, this is your blood pressure. Your finger is X number of centimeters long. This dog has spots, and they're this width. Lots of measurements, lots of information. Volcano, the magma is this temperature. Right, so let's learn a bunch of facts. Right, but as soon as you start talking about why is it that hot, well, then you're now talking about a theory, right? You're talking about how did that rock get hot and melted. Now you're talking about a theory. You're not necessarily talking about facts. You're tying facts together into an interpretive framework to explain why you observe the facts you observe, right? But in this legislation, theories have been defined as speculative, and therefore you can't talk about them. You can only present the facts. Like I said before, facts are going to be really boring if you don't talk about why the facts are the way the facts are. Like, how do they come to be? And what's the relationship of this fact to another fact? You can't talk about the relationship of 5 different facts with each other without having a theory about why those facts are held together. Like you're explaining your observations. What do I say? Theories explain facts. And if I'm in school, what am I most interested in? I'm interested in explanations for the observations in the world around us. Why are things the way that they are? Right? I'm going to require some theories to explain that. Now, as I said, his legislation is super confusing because are some of those things that he's thinking are theories are actually facts now? Because maybe higher education has shown that X, Y, and Z, this idea is actually a fact because it's been studied and somehow proven to be true. So there's another misconception that these folks have, is that you can prove a theory, all right, beyond a shadow of a doubt, kind of like a law, all right, that this absolutely has to be true. I don't know. Let's continue. All right, so first, science instruction can only include facts. The Board of Public Education may not include in content area standards or any standard requiring curriculum or instruction. So this is talking about like boards of instruction. They'll come up with like, the standardized test, right? The things that are the required learning outcomes. And thou shalt not include a learning outcome that includes scientific theories. They should only be learning scientific facts, right? In a scientific topic, that is not a scientific fact. Now, honestly, I think we all know what's actually going on here. These folks have a particular set of theories that they don't agree with, that they think are not facts, right? Not true. And they don't want those theories taught. Chances are they probably don't really have a problem with 99.99% of commonly held theories. I've got my dog sitting here next to me. And I have this theory. That my dog shares ancestry with wolves, right? We have coyotes in the area, and actually we have wolves not too far off. And I have this theory, right? I think well supported by a lot of evidence. Nonetheless, that's all circumstantial evidence. Those are individual facts that, for example, they share certain components of their genome that are very, very similar to wolves. But they're not exactly the same as wolves. Right? I wasn't there. I don't know of any eyewitness report of somebody that's taken a wolf and made my dog, right? So I have a theory, and I think it's a very sound theory. Because I have, again, like I said, lots and lots and lots of different points of evidence that I can tie together into a package, a theory that suggests this dog of mine is related to wolves. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe someday somebody's going to find out that like all domesticated dogs have absolutely no relationship to wolves at all, that they don't share any kind of common ancestor with them. So that theory could be overturned by potentially future facts that come to come into play, right? Future discoveries, individual bits of information that we all agree on are true, are the facts of this world. But now those facts could be tied together by somebody else into a new theory, of the origin of domesticated dogs, my Old English sheepdog in particular. I don't think that that's what this person's thinking about when they're trying to say, you can't talk about that. You can't talk about like, okay, domesticated dogs, all you can do is describe, here's this breed, there's this breed, there's this breed, and here's the height of this breed, here's the color coat of this breed, here's this, right? Here's the facts, right? Here's the observations. And you can repeat that observation, and you can confirm that my dog has, a certain coat color pattern on it. But don't actually talk about where different breeds come from. All right. Even where Old English sheepdogs come from, there's no actual historical record that's precise enough that I can say exactly like the exact steps of where an Old English sheepdog was separated from other breeds of dogs. Right. So I'm definitely going to have to theorize about that based on all the different pieces of evidence about how similar sheepdogs are to other dog breeds. And then there may be some historical records that suggest some bits of information out there, which are little pieces of facts that I've heard. And then again, those are even, especially historical records, those facts could be wrong, right? Those aren't incontrovertible, I can't say that word, undeniable facts. Yeah, I sound like I'm getting really nitpicky, but the idea here is I'm trying to separate the idea of theories are things that explain facts or explanatory frameworks or explanatory frames of reference for explaining a whole bunch of different observations about organisms and being able to say, hey, look, this dog is most likely related to this other particular breed. The superintendent of the public instruction shall ensure that any science curriculum guides developed by the Office of Public Instruction include only scientific fact. How are they going to do that? And who's going to determine what those facts are? Right? Who's going to determine what the facts are? Is it going to be some list of here's all the things that we know for certain and are true? And I would like to see that list, because I would imagine a lot of those things that look like facts are actually theories. Right? Even some things that seem very factual are still based on inferences, maybe, and types of measurements that where you're not directly measuring something, but you're inferring something, and you're super confident in that inference, but you're not necessarily, it's not factual in the sense that I think what they're thinking of as a fact. The trustees of a school district shall ensure that science curriculum and instructional materials, including textbooks, used in the district only include scientific fact. Again, who's going to be determining what those facts are? What's their measurement? How do they determine that? I mean, the only thing we have in this document is what a fact is something about a scientific fact is observable and repeatable. That apparently is what a fact is. Okay, I think we could think of things that are that we probably accept as facts that are a little hard to repeat. And then we get in, you can think of all kinds of crazy situations like you've got a comet out there, and we'll say something like, scientists will say here's this comet coming toward Earth, and that comet has an orbital period of, say, 5,000 years, right? And that's a measured rate. Well, we say, is that really measured? I mean, have you been around 5,000 years and seen the entire orbit and watched it the whole time? Have you observed it? And then did it repeat that whole orbit so you can be sure that, I don't know. It's hard to say exactly what repeatable and observable is. What's really happening there is you observe this comet in its trajectory, right? And you measure its speed, right? And so you measure that for a long enough period of time, which may only be days or weeks. And from there, you extrapolate, all right, backwards, and you use the theory of gravity, okay, right, in order to figure out what its orbital, what its orbit is, around the sun. And from extrapolating the speed of that and then the effects of gravity on that object as it meets other things, you can estimate, all right, the orbital period, or how long it takes to go all the way around one time. Right? These are the types of things that end up in textbooks as a table that has Halley's Comet, and here's what the orbit is, right, in the time period. Now, Halley's Comet's actually been come by a couple different times, so we have a better estimate of it. Is it a fact? Its orbital period a fact? I guess maybe its single orbital period that we observed is a fact, but it might actually change in the future. Right, so that particular fact is only a fact for that particular time period, not necessarily a fact for the future. It's kind of like measuring my heart rate. I can't repeat that measurement again. I guess I could record it and then I could look at it again. But if I'm just taking the heart rate without recording it, I can't go back in time and record it again. So that's not repeatable in that sense. Beginning July 1st, 2025, a parent may appeal the trustee's lack of compliance to subsection 4A to the county superintendent and subsequently to the superintendent of the public instruction under the provisions of the appeal of controversies in the title pursuant to 23-107 or some other legislation. The legislature intends for this section to be strictly enforced and narrowly interpreted. So you might have been thinking, okay, these guys, this is a kind of a wonky definition of a scientific fact and a scientific theory, but they really have a couple things in mind, and they're really only honing in on some more speculative theories. All right, cell theory. All organisms are composed of cells. It's about the closest thing we have to a law in biology, in the sense that you can. What does that theory help us do? I mean, have you ever taken a microscope out and looked at a particular organism and checked to see if it's made of cells or not? Right? If you haven't observed it, right? There's a lot of organisms that are alive on this earth that I don't think anyone has ever looked at. And yet we had this theory, cell theory, that all organisms are composed of cells. That helps me in the sense that I can go look at this organism wandering around, this snail outside, and I can say, that organism is composed of cells, and I'm pretty darn confident of it. Is it a fact? Okay, is it a fact that organism is composed of cells? I don't know that until I go measure it. All right, so does that mean I can only list organisms that are made of cells in a textbook that I've actually checked? Right? Do I actually trust somebody else's measurement? Maybe I have to go out and observe it myself, I guess he's saying, people in higher ed can like go out and test lots of cells test lots of organisms, make sure they're composed of cells, and we'll add them to the list of organisms composed of cells. But that's the whole idea of what a theory is, right? Those are facts. I look at a microscope and there's cells, right? And so I can see that there are cells there, and I keep doing it over and over and over again. And what happens after a while? You're like, you know what? I've got this idea. I got a hypothesis, and the hypothesis is that maybe if I looked at a bunch of other organisms, they would also be composed of cells. In fact, I predict they'll be made of cells. And then you go out and you look at a bunch of other organisms, and they are composed of cells. And then you start to say, maybe every single organism on Earth, everything we consider alive, is composed of cells. And you continue to check a variety of different diverse organisms, and they're composed of cells. After a while, what is that? Hypothesis, which is, I think, not really a guess. I'd say it's an intelligent guess, right? Based on some information you have. And so you are developing an idea about how to explain the facts that you're observing. I looked at different things and they all have the same thing in common. So I have these facts and I'm going to tie them together into an idea that maybe living things are composed of cells, right? That's a hypothesis, which then gets confirmed over and over again. And as no one else finds any data that doesn't support that, your confidence grows to the point where it just eventually, there's not a single day in which it becomes a theory, but it's so well supported and at some point that it is a theory now, right? And it's a very strong theory in biology. But could somebody look at something on the Earth someday and discover it's not composed of cells? I suppose so. So you can't teach cell theory if you're going to strictly enforce and have a very narrow definition, the definition you have made that theories are speculative and therefore you should not teach them in class. Cell theory is a theory. Now, again, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking they're not thinking that's a theory. They're thinking that's a fact because it's just so well supported. They're thinking of that as a fact. But here's the nub, right? They're not using scientific definitions. They're using common language definitions. And so here's what the common person thinks when we say these things. Well, that's going to create a huge amount of problems, right? When you try to implement something like this and you start now using a scientific definition, right? So this legislation has to include much more information about how these definitions were constructed and give examples of what they mean by this. So looking at number 6, maybe that comes into play. As used in this section, scientific fact means an indisputable and repeatable observation of a natural phenomena. So let's go back to our example of cell theory. That's a repeatable observation that we repeatedly observe that organisms have cells. And I use that theory to infer that other things I've never looked at also are composed of cells. I don't think you want your tax dollars going to proving like absolutely that all organisms are composed of cells, because that would require spending billions of dollars to look at every single organism. And then potentially every different, maybe you aren't composed of cells, but I am. I mean, how do you know? Maybe you've never looked at your own cells. Maybe you aren't composed of cells. You see how ridiculous that sounds? That's how strong that theory is, right? That you just accept that as true and you think of that as being factual. But it's a theory still in the sense that we can't be absolutely certain that all organisms are composed of cells. So there it is. That's the entire bill. That's all of it. That's all the explanation you get. And if this were passed, somebody's got to implement that. Who's going to look at all the textbooks and make sure that all the facts are right and that all the theories are eliminated? And I still want some clarification on exactly what it means that people in higher ed can look at these things and determine if they're facts. That clearly tells me they don't understand the difference between a fact and a theory. I mean, theories are never going to become facts. Okay, so misconceptions abound right here, right? This whole document is predicated upon a bunch of misconceptions, right? So here we have folks who obviously haven't learned themselves, right? But now want to impose their misconceptions on a whole bunch of other people in the name of having them only teach facts, right? So they didn't learn their facts, and now they're going to turn around and take their unlearned facts and misconceptions and force them on other people. Yeah, now that is that's the neglect of the educational system. These people are the product of bad education. So these people they're just the product of bad education themselves. So what are the three major misconceptions here? The first misconception is that theories should be interpreted as hunches, as guesses. Right? That's falling into the popular misconception of what theories are, the popular use of the word theory, right? Instead of the scientific sense. The second problem is that they're treating theories as if maybe they can become facts, right? So we have like well-established facts, and then we're looking at other things, and some other things become facts. And then we have ideas about how to tie together facts. And if we look at those ideas long enough and study them enough and repeat things and studies and test those ideas enough, eventually they become facts. But that's not actually what happens, all right? Theories don't become facts. Facts are explained by theories. And the third misconception is that scientific research provides proof in the sense of attaining absolute truth, all right? No, scientific knowledge, all right, are ideas of how we explain the observations of the world, the observations which are the facts, all right, is always tentative. It's always going to be subject to revision. Because if there's new evidence that comes to light, in other words, if new facts are discovered that don't fit into our prior interpretation, our prior theory, then that theory may have to be revised. It may be thrown out completely. It may be adjusted in a way, but it takes on a slightly new meaning. So anything that can be adjusted or changed over time, you wouldn't want to call that an absolute fact. And this legislation is trying to establish, like, here's what we want our students to know. Only absolute facts, right? That's all they should be taught. And as I said before, that's going to be a really boring education, and it's not going to allow those students to understand how to develop theories, how to develop ideas, and how all those facts are connected to one another. Where does that going to come from? How do you teach the scientific method of developing and testing ideas if you can't talk about theories? Right? Because you can't talk about theories and actually have them investigate theories, because you could be having them investigate something that's false. And we can't have that. Let's think of a couple of examples. So I'm thinking of, say, Niagara Falls. Right? What are the facts of Niagara Falls? All right, here's the location, Niagara Falls. Here's the amount of volume of water measured on a particular day that's falling over the falls. Here is the height of the falls. Right, so you can have a bunch of descriptive facts about Niagara Falls. Now, you could even go as far as maybe measuring erosion rate. How much rock eroded via the force of water flowing over the edge? How much rock eroded over the last year? Because you can have a measurement at the beginning of the year and the end of the year. You can say, here's a fact. This is how much it eroded over this past year. Great. And then you could do another measurement the next year and have another fact. So you could have a table that has a bunch of facts for how much is eroded. All right, so that's, okay, so let's talk about Niagara Falls. Okay, here are the facts. Okay, we're done. Now you know about Niagara Falls. Like I said before, that is going to be just excruciating, because, here's your exam. Let's just test you on the facts you memorized about Niagara Falls. What's more interesting about Niagara Falls? Like, where did Niagara Falls come from? Why is it in this particular location? How did it come to be? And then what about, there's this big canyon downstream from Niagara Falls. Now, looking at the amount of erosion that's occurring each year, couldn't you come up with a theory? I mean, many people have theorized, right? That if you continue to have, many people have theorized that the canyon downstream is the result of erosion from that river, and that the actual waterfall used to be farther down the river. And what it's doing is eroding back. And so every year it just keeps eroding up the river. And so you could theorize that the whole canyon eventually was, that the waterfall was way far down the canyon at some point. And you can then test that prediction by actually going down there and looking at the rocks and the erosion on the side canyon walls. You can do types of measurement that would estimate the amount of the speed of the waters flowing at different times in the past. There's a lot of different types of things you could do. But what you're doing is you're constructing what's the history of the falls. So that's explaining how the falls came to be where they're at right now. But that's a theory. Those are all theories, right? I think some are really well-founded theories in the sense that they are, just as we talked about, they are well supported by lots and lots and lots of observations that all make sense within this particular theory about the formation of the Niagara Falls and how the entire river system, the Niagara Falls actually goes down and then it takes a sharp turn. And then there's been observations that actually it used to go straight. Now, again, I'm giving you the theory, right? Well-supported theory, I think, but it used to go straight. And the reason we think that is because there is a buried valley that goes straight ahead, buried with rubble. In other words, there's a canyon that's full of rubble. And then that's an observation. That's a fact, right? They actually do the cores. You can actually see the geological survey, and you can see that there is a canyon that is full of stuff, right? And so it is thought that the theory is that Niagara Falls was part of a river that came straight up a ways. And so, okay, it came straight up. And so it was running out a different direction than it was now. Right now it takes like a right angle and goes out into the big lake. It used to go straight. And then how did it get full of rubble? Well, the theory is that there was an ice age, right? The ice age is an explanation for how that canyon got full of rubble, right? During the ice age, ice covered that whole region. And then when it pulled back, it basically filled in that entire canyon. And then a new river appeared. That river now has an outlet that's not at the same point, and that river began to carve its way back. And as it carved its way back, eventually it reached the point where it reached the old river channel. And once it reached the old river channel, it then began to go back up the same channel that we have today to the point where it's eroding now. All right, so there's this whole bunch, there's actually a collective set of theories that all go toward explaining the origin and present position of Niagara Falls. Now, if I only taught the facts, it would just be, here's a bunch of different observations. I observe there is a cross section, and in this cross section, I see there is what looks to be a canyon, but it's full of all kinds of other sediments. Okay, there you go. There's a fact. What are you going to do with that fact? It's like, memorize that fact? The only facts need to be in some context in order to have them, well, for us to give us any reason to memorize. Why would I memorize that? But once I know all those types of pieces of information, I can begin to collect together a larger idea. Oh, I see. That's why that looks like that. That's why that looks like that. That's why that looks like that. That's why that canyon's over there. That's why it's this deep. That rock is made of a certain kind of mineral that's harder, and that's why it doesn't erode in this way. That's a theory too. So it's like, there's just theories abound there that go well beyond the facts because they are tying facts together via ideas, right? Volcanoes. What are we going to do with volcanoes in this curriculum? Just tell you, like, what about an extinct volcano? Well, how do you know it's extinct? Were you there? Did you repeat the experiment of having lava come up out of this space and form this volcano again so I can see it? No, I measure things. So I have some facts. I measure this rock, and I discover it's a type of basalt. It has a certain concentration of oxygen and nitrogen and silicon and so forth. And I see there's little bubbles in it. They come from different kinds of gases in there. That's just like the rocks from this other mountain over here that is actually producing lava right now, like in Hawaii. Like there's an active volcano. And there's other inactive volcanoes. I'm calling them inactive, but I've never actually seen them be active. So I am using an overall set of knowledge about current volcanoes to infer what's happened with other volcanoes in the past. In fact, infer just basic idea that this was a volcano in the past. That is a theory, though. Okay, that's not a fact. That's a theory. Right? And it's not going to become a fact. It's going to become an extremely well-supported theory that other mountains in Hawaii are extinct volcanoes, or were volcanoes sometime in the past. And I think we could probably convince everybody that's true. And I don't see any reason why we can't teach that in school, that the Hawaiian Islands are a series of volcanic mountains. Now, I think the author here might object to they're millions of years old. And say, well, how can you know that? That's based on, this and that and something. You're going to think of that as being speculation. But I bet that he probably accepts that they're actually volcanic islands. Right? But that also is theory. Right? He's just willing to accept some theories and doesn't want to accept other theories. The question is, how then do you discriminate in a piece of legislation what theories you are going to allow and which ones you aren't going to allow? Now, that's where the really interesting questions are. That's what you really need to be thinking about. And because that's a much more nuanced question. Legislation isn't terribly nuanced sometimes, and especially the people that put together legislation and bills are less nuanced than that. They have a particular political agenda, and the facts aren't going to get in the way of that particular agenda. One other quick example. I'm trying to think of kind of silly example because everyone goes to the gravity and some other like popular theories, plate tectonics and so forth. Like, what are we going to do about those? I'm more like, in a practical sense, what if a parent or a student, just says, I don't believe this. You're teaching me a theory, even though it's a well-established theory. But they could use this particular route to go to their administrator and say, like, that's not a proven fact, and so therefore it has to be eliminated from the curriculum. So I'm going to use a silly example, but let's say here's an observation. All right, there are caves in Grand Canyon, and inside those caves, there are balls of how should I put this? There are balls of dung. All right, really large balls of dung, and I can't even say that because we didn't see the organism actually make that dung. And so I actually have a theory. The theory is that because I have an observation. The observation is that there are these dried masses of plant material that they have certain characteristics. So I could measure those characteristics, right? They have a certain amount of degradation. They have certain kinds of grasses. Here's these types of plants are in this particular ball of material. And then I have the observation, this ball of material looks a whole lot like a defecated thing from other animals. And so I could come to the conclusion, based on lots of observations, lots of facts, that I could hypothesize that this came from an animal, right, pooping in that cave. So that's my hypothesis. And then I could find a whole bunch more facts that continue to support that hypothesis. And so I'd say I have a theory at some point that these are the remains of defecated material. And they're found in this cave. Well, the fact is they're found in the cave. The thing is, do you know that it was actually produced in the cave? It's like maybe it was brought there. Like maybe an animal pooped somewhere else and then carried the poop in there from 10 miles away. Can you prove me wrong? Like if you want to dispute the fact that there's one cave that has like 10,000 of these large clumps all piled up, right? But if I wanted to say to you, how do you know? Like, can you be sure that that actually was the result of an animal depositing it right there? And I would say, well, no, I can't. I don't know for a fact that that's true. But I do believe the theory. All right. I do believe, I don't have any reason to doubt the theory. It's beyond reasonable doubt that an organism did this right here at some particular time. But nonetheless, you could say it's not a fact. You have a theory that happened there, but I have a theory that says that bats, from Guatemala, picked up dung from mammoths. Actually, it's not mammoths. It's going to be giant sloths. That's where they come from, the Grand Canyon. So giant sloths living in South America pick them up and carry them and deposit them in that particular place. I say, well, what is your evidence? And I was like, well, I don't actually have any evidence, but, it's my theory is just as good as your theory, because you're thinking of like, you're just guessing. I'm just guessing. Yeah, but my guess is based on a bunch of observations, and all those observations make sense within the context of my theory. Your theory, all right, theory quotes, doesn't really, there's nothing there for me to there are no facts that support your theory. That truly is just a guess. That's a wild dream you had. And until you come back with some evidence for that, I don't really feel compelled to take it seriously. Unfortunately, with legislation like this, all right, we're saying, well, any theories are just speculation. It doesn't matter how much evidence you have. That's speculation because you can't know for a fact that that's true. And we're only teaching facts in this class. All right, so you can't talk about that. All you could do is say, like, here's the Grand Canyon, here's the layers, this is what we observe. Hey, there's a cave. We observe balls of plant matter there. And as soon as we start talking about where that plant matter came from or what organism made that plant matter, you're like, well, what you're doing is you're speculating. Well, I'm not speculating. I have a really good hypothesis, and I have a really good theory about that. Giant ground sloths once lived, right, in the Grand Canyon. And the thing is, you can say, well, I have their poop. And I was like, well, okay, that's one piece of evidence. What else do you have? Well, we got claw marks, right? They're made from the sized, claws that they have. Oh, by the way, we also have a jaw. We also have a full skeleton right inside that same cave. Well, maybe the skeleton got washed in there thousands of years ago, or maybe other animals brought the skeleton in there. Yeah, but the skeleton is completely like almost connected together, like all the pieces. Like, how would you bring in a 10-foot tall giant sloth and like lay it out there? Well, maybe somebody's playing with you, right? Maybe this was Native Americans from the past that collected these bones, and then as part of some sort of ceremonial thing, they brought them all there and put them together to make it look like this giant sloth. In fact, maybe giant sloths don't even exist. Maybe because you've never seen one, right? And so maybe they took bones from other organisms and they laid them out together. Right? And I'll say, well, I can test that theory because I can actually look at the bones and probably extract some DNA and show that the bones are not from the same organism, and that would give you support for your theory. But if all the bones have the same DNA as all the other ones, I'd say that all came from the same individual, right? So I can test those theories, and I can provide more facts. Here's the fact. Here's their DNA. Here's their DNA sequence, and here's their DNA sequence for this particular gene. These are facts. As soon as I say, okay, those facts, if I put them together, tell me that these two bones, my theory is these two bones are the same, and that's the fact that supports that. All right, so I'm once again, theories explain the facts that I observe. If I'm only teaching facts, I really can't talk about ideas. All right, I really can't talk about why I'm observing what I'm observing. I can't talk about why something is connected to something else, because then I'm theorizing. Right? But there's nothing wrong with scientific theorizing. That's the whole purpose of scientific theories and the scientific method, is to develop well-substantiated ideas that are supported by lots and lots and lots of facts that give us enough confidence to say, like, I believe that was a giant sloth that lived in that particular cave. I don't have any reason to have reasonable doubt about that. I can go on with my life and believe that there was a giant sloth that lived in that cave, even though I don't have a videotape of it. I'm totally fine with that. Not all theories are as well supported, and ones that aren't as well supported, I am going to say, yeah, okay, that seems reasonable. You have some good evidence for that, but there's enough like points where it's not clear to me, right? How like maybe some other facts quite fit in. And so maybe your theory hasn't completely fleshed out and completely explained all the observable facts, or I just found some new facts. I just made some new observations that don't quite fit with your theory, right? Then I'm allowed to question that particular theory, right? In fact, I'm allowed to come up with another theory. My theory better explains all the evidence, including all the new evidence I just collected. And so I think we should replace your theory with my theory. And so scientific theories are moldable, changeable over time. All right, what's going to happen with this legislation? I don't know. This is one of the things where lots and lots and lots of bills like this get introduced in different places, and this one made the news because of really how ridiculous it is. But that doesn't mean that ridiculous things don't get passed, right, by ridiculous lawmakers. Especially since apparently there's lawmakers in Montana that their scientific knowledge is very limited. But they're also playing to an audience that might have limited knowledge, right? Through no fault of their own, but the general public often doesn't understand these things. And you start talking about, like, we're going to teach our kids facts, not speculation. Well, who's going to say that's a bad idea? Of course you want to have your kids taught facts, things that are really true, not this speculation stuff, right? So stuff like this can get passed because of that, but the downstream consequences are that it's going to be incredibly confusing, for teachers as to what they can say, and really restrictive. They're going to be afraid to say things about a lot of different ideas. Now, of course, as I said before, I think really there's kind of like a underneath the table, sort of like wink, wink. It's okay. You can talk about Niagara Falls, and you can talk about volcanoes, you can talk about giant sloths and your theory about how they actually lived in the Grand Canyon, even though that's not that's a theory. We can call those facts, right? We can talk about those things. What we have in our minds is certain ideas that we don't like, okay? Certain theories, and it may be theories about the biology of sex or evolution, or right. So These theories, all right, we don't want them taught. And so one way of preventing them from being taught is simply say that we're not going to teach theories because they're speculation, because those things are called theories. So we can eliminate them from the curriculum and only have facts taught. But they're the facts we want taught. And so ultimately, somebody's going to decide what those facts are, and it's just going to be a set of things that's based on somebody's desires, right? It's not going to be based on science, right? And the amount of support for something. It's going to be based on politics and, cultural perceptions. And so at the end of the day, this legislation is kind of just, all it does is allow for people's ambitions and desires who are in charge to make certain things happen. It sounds like it's empowering parents and so forth, but then again, it's sort of like they know what the types of parents are going to be the ones that are going to be, making complaints, and they're only going to be complaining about certain topics, and those are topics that we're fine with them complaining about. So it's not really about what it says at the beginning, which is assuring our students really understand the difference between a scientific fact and a scientific theory. Again, that's kind of humorous. Like the very first whereas, all students should be, understand the difference between these two things. And then here we're going to go on and explain how we don't understand the difference between those two things. Like in the legislation, in this bill itself, we're going to show our ignorance of this particular topic while at the same time telling our students that they need to know the difference. It would be really funny if it weren't really so sad. That's it. I think I've beat this bill to death here. Good luck, teachers in Montana, figuring this out if it gets passed. I'm sure there'll be dozens and dozens of stories of crazy different things that that teachers can't do. We're going to be seeing them throw out all kinds of books, and it's just going to be a giant mess. But as I said, I really think that this is going to go nowhere. Right. This is a show bill. This is a sorry, I said I was done, but more rant. This is a brand new state senator who I'm sure made certain promises to his followers, right? That he was for X, Y, and Z, and he was going to get rid of this. And what do new state senators or new congressmen do? They immediately start proposing all kinds of bills. And those bills say exactly what they said they promised to do. But they know they're not going to get passed. Right? They're going to get voted down, but what can they do? They can go back and say, look, I tried, I fulfilled my promises, right? Very few legislators actually promise that they will get, their promises, they will get the actual legislation passed. And no, they're going to introduce legislation as if, well, if I introduce it, that's what's going to happen. Or as we've already seen in Congress, they pass bills, but they only pass them in one house, but they know they're never going to get passed in the Senate, but they can still tell their constituents, look what we've done. We passed this bill. If you know it's never actually going to become reality, in fact, if you know it's never going to become a fact, then is it really a fact? Is it really reality? It's not reality. It's for show. And I consider this a show bill. This is just to show that I'm doing something. And I looked at the other 4 bills that this particular person has introduced already just in the first couple of months they've been there. And I would say that they're all like that. They're all catchy type things. They're like, here's things that I'm sure that were lines from my pledges. And now I'm going to fulfill my pledges by introducing this legislation. I could have written this legislation or this bill in 15 minutes. Right? It's a page. It's a page that wasn't researched, wasn't thought through. It just has the catchwords that were necessary in order to say and point their constituents to, like, here it is. I did it. That's all this is. The sad thing is that for as little thought as was put into developing this particular bill and the language in this bill, as little thought there's actually some actual real possibility that it could get passed. So I don't think it'll be passed, but you can never say never. Weird things happen, and bills like this squeak through. And so we'll see. I think we'll know in a week or two what happens. Hey, thanks for listening. I'm going to stop here. Really appreciate it. All your time, effort, hit like, subscribe to my station, and we'll be back with who knows what next. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.